Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. This is Dr. Muhammad Shafiq, lecturer of Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies, and I'm your instructor of Introduction to Logic. The course code is PHI 101, and this is lecture number 13. Today, we are going to discuss what is language and its functions. What is language, and why do we need to study or discuss language and logic? So as we know, again, we'll refer back to the basic definition of logic, which says that it is the study of those methods and principles which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning, right? So any reasoning or any argument is always expressed in any given language. If you can think well and if you can have good imagination, you can make good arguments in your mind. But if you do not know the trick of expressing it conveniently and effectively, then your reasoning is of no use, because the whole purpose of reasoning is to convince people. And if you cannot express your reasoning in a language or in words, that would basically mean you have failed. You have failed to convince people because you cannot express or you cannot communicate your reasoning. So that is how important language is in logic. If you don't know the functions of language, if you don't know the importance of language, and if you don't know the language itself, we cannot effectively convey our message. We cannot express our reasoning. So if we cannot express our reasoning, we cannot convince people. So that is how language has importance in logic. So what is language now? Let's try to dig out. Simply, language is a basic tool of communication. While living in a society or any given community, if you do not understand and if you do not know the language, you cannot live a successful life in that given society. For example, if someone comes to live in our society or our community here in Kohat, and if he or she does not understand and speak Urdu, English, Urdu, Pashto, or Hinko, he or she cannot survive in this society because it is not easy to live in a society in which you don't know the local language. So language is a basic tool of communication. We often communicate our concepts and judgments and reasoning through language. A very famous philosopher of 20th century, Ludwig Wittgenstein, says that we use language while giving orders, describing an object, or giving its measurements, reporting an event, speculating about an event, forming and testing hypotheses, presenting the result of an experiment, making up a story, play acting, singing, guessing riddles, telling a joke, solving a problem in arithmetic, asking, cursing, greeting, and pain. Quote, in fact, it means we cannot escape from the language. As Wittgenstein described, we cannot even imagine without language. Even if you're thinking something in your mind, you cannot do it without any language. So language is the basic tool of communication, to communicate not only to other people but to your own self. You cannot imagine anything without language. Now, there are so many languages in this world. Every community, every society uses their own language. But with logic, it is related in a way that all our reasoning are expressed in a language. If we remember the definition of an argument, we said that in the definition that argument or proposition does not have anything to do with a particular language. A proposition is a proposition no matter in any language it is. So here that would mean that we are discussing language in that context. That would mean we are not discussing or we are not trying to know any particular language such as Urdu, English, Pashto, Arabic or any other particular language. But we are trying to look into the language from the aspect of reasoning and what role language plays in reasoning. So now we are going to move and see how many functions language plays. How many functions are there for language which are to be played. Equally three functions of language, of any given language in this world. And the first function of any language is called informating function. Any language serves or plays informative role or function when it is used to either convey or gain information, when it is used to give information or take information from anyone. Every language uses different kind of terminology and words to give and take information. We are often informed or inform others about certain things, and this information is obviously in a given language. So this function of language is called an informative function of language. This information may include, obviously, true propositions or false propositions, good arguments, bad arguments, etc., etc. For example, if someone asks me, who is the Prime Minister of Pakistan? Now he or she is using the informative function of language. And when I try to respond to this question, I'm also using the informative function of language. And if I say that Mr. Donald Trump is the Prime Minister of Pakistan, I'm using the informative function of language. I am giving information. I am passing a judgment. I am basically presenting a proposition. Now this proposition may be either true or false. It does not have anything to do with the function of the language. So informative function could be Like a language could play informative function in either giving true information or false information, or getting true information or false information. So it is, generally speaking, an informative function of the language. The next function is called expressive function of language. Now, what is expressive function of language? As it is evident from its headings, a language plays expressive function when it is used to convey or evoke feelings. We often express sorrows when we say, alas, or what a pity. We express our enthusiasm when we say, that is really great. Similarly, we express our awe and wonder when we say, wow, what a great expression. So, language, when tries to express emotions or evoke emotions in someone, it is playing expressive function. It is called the expressive function of language. The best example of expressive function of language is poetry, in which poet conveys or tries to convey his or her feelings, which also evoke feelings in the listeners. Similarly, like when we listen to the songs, these evoke some emotions and passions inside. So they are basically the function. These are the function of expressive function of a language. Or maybe when you might have come across this experience, because it's quite normal in our society that when uh, two people have dispute and they are fighting or they are arguing with each other, they try to use the words, they try to use those words, they try to swear upon each other so that they can evoke the feelings, or they can express their anger and remorse to the other person, and they use this abusive words which can obviously evoke uh, emotions in the listener, and also it's a kind of expression of the emotions of whoever is uttering these words, and this kind of emotions or evoking of emotions can lead to a bigger fight or maybe physical fight. Why? Just because someone uttered a few words, how can it lead to that big fight or kind of a big clash between the two families or two clans? Because the words which were chosen during that verbal argument were not appropriate and evoked such kind of emotions that the people, they get they just, they cannot control their emotions, and those emotions which are blind in nature, they would lead them to be more physical and try to harm the person who's uttering these words. So words play a very effective role in any kind of situation. So expressive function of a language is like, using different kind of your using different kind of terms expressing your emotions. And as I said earlier, the best example of expressive function of language is poetry. Although such uses do not convey any information, they do serve an important functions in everyday life, since how we feel sometimes matter as much as or more than what we hold to be true. So the expressive function of a language is also very important uh, in terms of composing arguments and logic. Now the third and function of language is called the directive function of language. Language plays directive function when it aims to cause or prevent an action, such as giving orders or requests, etc. Directive uses of language aim to cause or to prevent some overt action by a human agent. When I say shut the door or or write read the textbook or memo myself, don't rely so heavily on the passive voice. I'm using language directively. The point in each of these cases is to make someone perform or forswear a particular action. This is a significant linguistic function too, but like the expressive use, it doesn't always relate logically to the truth of our beliefs, simply or the directions. Now, we need to note that the intended use in a particular instance often depends more on the specific context and tone of voice than it does on the grammatical form of vocabulary of what is said. The simple declarative sentence, "I am hungry," for example, could be used to report a physiological condition or to express a feeling or implicitly to request that someone feed me. In fact, use of two or more varieties may be mixed together in a single utterance. Stop that, for example, usually involves both expressive and directive functions jointly. In many cases, however, it is possible to identify a single use of language that is probably intended to be the primary function of a particular linguistic unit. In short, it is very rare when we utter a proposition or statement which plays only one function of this language. Normally speaking, whenever we are talking, our language plays multiple functions, a kind of mixture of maybe all these three functions, that is to say informative, expressive and directive function. It is very rare that language plays a function in isolation. So these are the three uh, functions of language, and in order to in order to have more valid and kind of effective reasoning, we need to understand these functions of language. After these three functions of language, we need literal and emotive meanings of words. Sometimes words and phrases have different literal meanings than the meanings which are conveyed in a given situation. Words and phrases have two kinds of meanings, literal and emotive. Many words and phrases have both actual meaning, describing something how it is, and emotive meanings, expressing either positive or negative feelings. So we need to understand the context of the words in which that in which context these have been uttered in order to uh, understand the meaning of those words, whether they have been used in literal sense or emotive sense. Even single words or short phrases can exhibit the distinction between purely informative and partially expressive uses of language. Many of the most common words and phrases of any language have both a literal or descriptive meaning that refers to the way things are, and an emotive meaning that expresses some positive or negative feelings about them. Thus, the choice of which words to use in making a statement can be used in hopes of evoking a particular emotional response. So we need to be very careful while judging different arguments or propositions, and we need to take into consideration the context where these words have been uttered, that whether these have been uttered in literal meaning or whether they carry any emotive meanings or expressions. So these are the functions of language which we need to understand in order to have more command over our reasoning and in order to distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. And I hope you have understood this lecture. If you have any problems or if you have any queries or questions, please do let us know so that we can discuss these and clarify these before the start of the next topic in our next lecture. Till then, thank you very much. Take care and Allah Hafiz.